preaching to the choir a little bit. I met Rishi in the Master Gardener program, and after chatting a little bit about what we do, he asked, do I do presentations? And I do outreach presentations all the time, usually closer to the Los Angeles area, but I really admire what Rishi's doing, so I came out here tonight, and thank you to your parents for opening up their home. Both of us actually thank all of you for the wonderful food. So my name is Anna, and I'm the co-founder of this organization called the 5 Gyres Institute. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but just a quick show of hands so I get an idea. Have you guys heard the term gyre? Do you know a little bit about this issue? No. 2 people know what a gyre is. 3 people, okay. Well, I'm going to get to that. I was introduced to this issue back in 2001. I was a grad student at the time studying environmental policy, and I heard a talk from an oceanographer on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, as they call it. And I was pretty stunned that no one in my grad school program was talking about this. There was very little in the media about it. Fast forward now to 2012, and I think it's gotten out a lot more, but still we're at the infancy of our scientific understanding of this issue, and there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of public awareness. So even if you've all heard something about this issue, I hope you walk away tonight with a lot more information and that you can spread the word, because we're 10 people here, but we need to get this information out to a lot of people. So let's back up a little bit, because since 2001, I got involved as a volunteer in a research trip in 2004, and what I saw there profoundly changed my life. I'm going to get to that. In the last 3 years, I've had a chance to sail 25,000 miles across all 5 oceanic gyres. And a gyre is simply an oceanic current system. They're thousands of miles wide. Every ocean has a gyre. And all of our floating plastic from land that we all see in our streets, eventually winds its way out to the ocean and gets stuck in these massive current systems. Before our organization started, the only information that was known about this came from the North Pacific Gyre, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the Texas-sized island. There's a lot of myths about it. But there was virtually zero research on the Southern Hemisphere, so I'm going to share that with you. We have seen that in less than 100 years, we have virtually changed the seascape of our entire planet. And it dates back to the 50s. I mean, plastics have been around for roughly 100 years, but it's really been in the last 50 years or so that we've seen this explosion of our disposable culture. This was the cover of Life magazine in 1955. They were celebrating throwaway living, because this is when plastics were first entering the average American household. And back then, people celebrated plastic. They thought, well, it's cheap, it's lightweight, you can drop it, won't break, it comes in all these pretty colors. And they even marketed it to women as a boon to women's liberation, because no need to do the dishes, you just throw it all away. Well, at the time, we weren't really thinking about what this means to throw something away, because all of those same properties of plastic, that it is cheap, that it's lightweight, and that it's durable, are now coming back to haunt us. And if you look back at the trajectory of our plastic production, in the 30s we weren't using plastic bags and bottles and things like that. It was during World War II that we first started introducing plastics into the war effort. Then post-war, we've now got this massive infrastructure to make plastic, so they needed to come up with new ways to use it to keep the economy going. And so that's when we start replacing a lot of our durables with plastic, this throwaway material. You can see kind of a steady increase. What happened in the 70s, anyone?
Oil crisis.
Yep, oil crisis, so we have a dip. And it's been a pretty steady increase until it's just really skyrocketed. Today we're making roughly 120 billion, probably more, pounds of plastic in the United States alone.
Is that a year?
Yes. Yeah, a year.
So we're making more than ever.
We're making more than ever. And we're more than
much awareness is being held.
with little awareness, and our populations are increasing, as we know, exponentially. So when we talk about a throwaway culture, this is what throwaway means today. This is a photo I took in 2008 on the Big Island of Hawaii. And when we think Hawaii, this is the last image that comes to mind. But this was a beach that very few people go to on the Big Island. They call it Junk Beach today. And walking around this island, I found myself in waste virtually up to my knees, in some cases up to my waist. And this is a very tough beach to get to. Very few people go to this beach. Picking up cartons and plastic bottles and shampoo containers, I saw writing in Spanish, English, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean underneath these products. So that tells us this stuff is virtually coming from the entire Pacific Rim, not from surfers, not from beachgoers and picnickers, but this is washing up from the entire Pacific Ocean. People ask, well, how much of it comes from the boating industry? We were talking about that earlier. The UN estimates roughly 20% comes from fishing fleets and cruise ships and the Navy. Most of it, roughly 80%, comes right here from our backyard. That's Marina del Rey. I know that we're much further east here, but this is my backyard. And this river, Ballona River, drains a lot of downtown Los Angeles. So it's as simple as the bottle cap we see in our streets after rain washes into rivers, into storm drains, into creeks, and eventually out to sea. Once it gets out to sea, that's where our work begins, because for most of us it's out of sight, out of mind, but out in the ocean, it gets swept up into these massive current systems that we call gyres. And you can see there's 5 major gyres in the world: the North Pacific, South Pacific, North Atlantic, South Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean. We've been to all 5, and we've seen that plastic is a problem virtually across the planet. So I'm going to show you a quick depiction of how the North Pacific gyre moves, and this will give you a sense for the ocean currents. So this was an ocean current simulation study done by some NOAA scientists. To the right, those blue squares, that's the West Coast. Those were all satellite tracking buoys, drifters, that were tracked over time. And the left is Japan. So you can see over half a year, 1 year, 3 years' time, how they move. And this is all driven by currents and by some wind. So imagine that one of those drifters is a plastic bottle with the cap on. With the cap off, it'll actually sink. So we really don't know what's happening on the ocean floor. With the cap on, it'll float. It's gone from California to Japan and back in 6 to 10 years, riding those currents of the gyre. And then 20 years, you can see a pattern emerge here. Those 2 denser patches we call the Eastern Garbage Patch, and that's what you've all heard of, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the Texas-sized island. That all comes from the Eastern Garbage Patch. The Western Garbage Patch hasn't been studied in about 30 years, and that's actually where my husband is right now, somewhere between the Marshall Islands and Tokyo, and I'm not going on that trip.
How long have scientists known about the garbage patches? Because I've only heard of them in the last 3 years.
The first published literature on plastic in the oceans was roughly the 70s. People have known about this for some time, but it's only really been in the last 5 to 10 years that it's picked up in popular media, mainstream media, everything from Oprah to the Colbert Report to just more articles online and etc. So we've got all this plastic now circulating these currents. Plastic is petroleum based. It doesn't biodegrade, but it photodegrades. So UV light will make it brittle, break it down, fragment it. And as far as we know on a time scale that humans understand, it never completely disappears. So what impact does this have on marine wildlife, the creatures that live out there?
Oh, wow.
Pretty heavy environmental impact. This is a common snapping turtle that was found in New Orleans by a 10-year-old boy. And you can kind of guess the story of what happened to her. The good news is that she's still alive. My husband and I had a chance to meet her. Oops. Sorry. We had a chance to meet this turtle. Her name is Mae West, and that usually escapes young people. But if you've heard of Mae West, the actress, you can guess why. So I'll show you what she looks like today. Can you see okay?
Mm-hmm.
No? No? Oh, and you meet my husband too.
This turtle got caught in a milk jug ring, and here's what happened.
Wow.
So she's since been named Mae West.
Has a thin waist. But the backbone, unfortunately, the backbone has never grown normally, and the turtle even flexes. Plastics were designed to last forever, and it makes no sense we design products from it that are designed to be thrown away.
So that's one thing we try and leave particularly young students with. we designed this material, it's a petroleum-based product, it's designed to last forever, and we use it to make all these throwaway products, and it makes absolutely no sense, like many things we do as humans. This is the animal that first inspired me to get into this issue. That trip I took in 2004 was to Guadalupe Island off the coast of Baja California, and there's a strong population of these birds called Laysan albatross on this island. And we were collecting stomach samples. We collected 30 stomach samples from these birds because they regurgitate things that they can't digest. Every single one of them was full of plastic. So when you go to a place like Midway Island in the middle of the Pacific or Guadalupe off the coast of Baja, inevitably you find dead birds and you find tons of plastic. This is actually a string of debris that my husband picked up on Midway Island in the middle of the Pacific. And everything you see here on this string, from toothbrushes to lighters to shotgun shells to even a Spider-Man leg, everything he pulled out of the stomachs of these birds on the island. So overall, when you look at all the marine species impacted by plastic waste, it's not just the random bird or fish. It's roughly half of all seabird species. I should stand somewhere else. Are you over there? Okay, that's probably easier.
Do you want a taller chair like sit on?
I'm okay. Yeah. I napped earlier today. It's roughly half of all seabird species, roughly half of all marine mammal species. And today the numbers, this study was actually from 1997, so all these numbers are conservative. Today, according to some different sea turtle researchers that we've worked with, it's 100% of all sea turtle species have been found either ingesting plastic or entangled in plastic. And those are the two main ways that species and marine animals are affected by plastic. What I'm going to get into next is how we as humans are affected by plastic. So I had my first chance to see this issue firsthand back in 2008. I had been to Guadalupe Island, but I had never been out to the Gyre. And so I was invited on board this research expedition in 2008 from Hawaii back to Los Angeles, 1 month at sea, 4,000 miles to go through the Gyre and collect samples. We were a crew of 6, and it was a profoundly life-changing expedition in a couple of ways. What we do is we drag this research net. It's like a traditional plankton tow, so we can collect small particles of plastic and also zooplankton. And I brought some samples here. Oh, here they are. This is one of the samples from that actual research trip. So you guys have probably had a chance to look at it, but feel free, I can pass it around. What you see here would have covered an area roughly 3 soccer fields in size. So when you hear about the island or the patch, it's not really a patch in a visible way. It's only when we pull up these samples that we see just how much plastic is out there. Now, a handful over 3 soccer fields might not sound like a lot, but we estimate there's roughly 10 million soccer fields in the North Pacific Ocean alone, and that's just one of 5 of these gyres. So, you can have a look at that. That's a daytime sample that you're looking at. This is a nighttime sample, and we see that it's full of more life. It's full of fish, and that's because every single day in the ocean you have the largest migration of any species on the planet, and it's a vertical migration of zooplankton that surface to feed on phytoplankton, and then other creatures like this fish here, which is called a lanternfish, that surface just to feed. So they're feeding at night at the surface of the ocean, which is increasingly becoming saturated with plastic waste. We thought we'll bring these species home and dissect them and see what's in their stomach. So we brought 671 of these fish back to land and found this in their stomachs. You can see the particles of plastic on the top and the zooplankton on the bottom. Here's another stomach sample. To the left is zooplankton, what they should be eating, and to the right is all the plastic that they've ingested. I'm going to show you a drop of one of our samples under a microscope. There are 2 pieces of plastic in this image. And take a close look and see if you can determine which is plastic and which is zooplankton. So those are the 2 pieces of plastic. Overall, of those 671 fish, these lanternfish that we brought back, 35% had plastics in their stomachs. Scripps Institute of Oceanography has done a similar study. They found roughly 9%. So we know that this stuff is getting into the food chain. And these fish, these lanternfish, are food, are prey for species like like tuna and mahi-mahi and squid and other things that humans eat. So that brings up the question of what's getting into the food chain, working its way up the food chain, and winding up on our dinner plate. So that was one of the things that was really life-changing for me. The other was when one of the other researchers on board made a little ring out of plastic trash and proposed in the middle of the garbage patch on Valentine's Day. So that was how I met and got engaged to my husband. And before the wedding planning began, we decided, well, he had wanted to do this for years, to build a boat out of plastic bottles and sail the Pacific Ocean. He thought this would be a great way to raise awareness, and it was. So we hit the ground running, collected 15,000 plastic bottles. We had a lot of schools around Los Angeles helping us collect bottles. The Burbank Recycling Center gave us about 10,000 bottles. We collected a bunch of masts from wrecked ships, from wrecked sailboats around Los Angeles at junkyards. Got a little Cessna from a junkyard in Palmdale. And that's the boat. 2.5 months later, we called her Junk, because she was made out of junk. And we thought it would take about 6 weeks for him to sail from California to Hawaii through the Gyre. It took a wee bit longer than that. It took about 12 weeks, took 3 months, the entire summer. But he was able to make some videos on board using his little laptop and sending them via satellite phone. So I'm going to show you a couple of those videos. The first one is kind of funny. It's about the worst storm of the entire voyage that happened day 4. We had been, just working round the clock for 2.5 months to build the boat, get the finances together, literally tie the whole thing together. We towed the boat out to sea, out to San Nicolas Island, and 3 days later I get a call on the satellite phone, baby, we're sinking. Because a bunch of the bottle caps got loose on these Nalgene bottles. They were rubbing against each other. The ocean is a very unforgiving place, and the whole boat started sinking. It sunk about a foot in the water. So I was able to rally a dive boat and 6 crazy volunteers who were willing to go out at 3 in the morning. We brought glue, we brought supplies, we spent the whole day dumping water out of the bottles, gluing them back on, and then they went on their merry way. So all the labels on the canned food washed off, and you'll see what the result of that was.
So the ocean stripped all the labels off our cans, they got rusted, now we gotta eat them. It's all beans and corn. And
Come on, corn! Give me corn, give me corn, give me corn, give me corn, give me corn. Corn! Beans!
one more? Hey, what is this?
Go for the best. Beans! More beans.
No wind. We're completely becalmed today. No wind whatsoever. So we're just gonna fish and eat. Fishy, 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 fishy. Oh, there he is. Right.
Lunch.
They had a lot of time.
We are now skirting the edge of the North Pacific Gyre, roughly 1,000 miles east of Hawaii. We're finding lots of plastic on the surface of the ocean. It's mostly small fragments, blue, green, white, and black, among many different kinds of zooplankton. Everywhere you go, the North Pacific Ocean, we find plastic. So I filleted this fish, thinking we're going to eat it, and here's what I found. It's full of plastic. This is the whole reason that we're out here, to bring this to your attention. The plastic isn't benign. The fish won't pass it. The plastic is full of persistent organic pollutants, things like PCBs, DDT, PAHs, things that are known human carcinogens and endocrine disruptors, things you don't want in your body, but they're in the fish that we eat. I want plastic in my sushi.
That was a very, very long summer, but that fish, I mean, this was one of the main reasons that we did the whole voyage. We had seen plastic in the stomachs of these lanternfish. This was the first time we had seen plastic in the stomach of a fish that people commonly eat. It's a rainbow runner. You'll see this fish on menus around the world, especially in Hawaii and some of the islands. And they were about to eat this fish, and I was really happy because we didn't pack enough food for 3 months. They were getting really, really hungry. But this one they tossed overboard. And the reason for that is what we know about plastic and the way it behaves in the ocean. Each particle of plastic, down to the size of a grain of rice, can absorb chemicals at high concentrations. Plastic, a lot of these chemicals like PCBs and DDT and chemicals that wash into our ocean through industry, through agriculture, we call them persistent organic pollutants, POPs for short. They're hydrophobic, so they won't mix with water, but they're oleo or lipophilic. They'll stick to oily substances. Plastic is petroleum-based, so there's this perfect synergy between the two. And coming from a scientist that we've worked with in Japan, Dr. Takada, he's shown that a single particle of plastic this size can have up to 1 million times higher concentration of these POPs than the seawater around it. So we know that plastic absorbs chemicals both in the ocean and on land. We know that these plastic particles are getting into the food chain. We know that with those small lanternfish, that these chemicals can bioaccumulate. They can become increasingly stronger as they work up the food chain to the bigger fish, like the tuna and the mahi-mahi that you and I eat. So the big question in the scientific world is now, do those chemicals desorb into the tissues of animals and work their way up the food chain into our bodies? And in 2009, after the junk raft project that we did, Marcus and I did a junk ride. We took a bunch of samples, we rode our bikes from Vancouver to Mexico, and we gave a bunch of talks along the way. We met with legislators and teachers, and we gave those samples away. In Portland, Oregon, where my sister lives, she's a doctor, we did a blood test on me, because at the time, we were thinking about someday starting a family, and as you can tell, that time has come. So I was curious about what my body burden is, and by body burden, I just mean the sum total of synthetic chemicals that we all carry in our body, that we're exposed to through cosmetics, through food, through our shampoos, through our water. So I did this blood test, and we sampled for PCBs, DDT, flame retardants, PBDEs, and PFCs. So I'll show you what we found in my body. That's my sister.
That's a lot. So we just took about 60 cc's of my blood. We're now going to have it centrifuged to be sampled for PCBs, DDTs, and other chemicals. So we probably should, if you can stand down, do one more round. You got go down much of your blood. We're taking one more round of my blood. Apparently they need a lot.
And that's my younger sister, a couple years ago. So the chemicals in my body and in any of our bodies were trace levels, parts per million. So it's not necessarily that these chemicals are going to make me or any of us sick tomorrow, but there's many things we don't know. Is one, how do these chemicals interact with one another in the human body? And two, with a lot of these persistent pollutants, we used to believe that the dose makes the poison, that it's the sum total of a certain contaminant that causes it to be toxic in the human body. But the new understanding of a lot of these chemicals that are endocrine disruptors that can lead to reproductive disorders or to miscarriage, obesity, a lot of different issues, is that it's the timing of the exposure that's critical. So for example, if a woman is pregnant and exposed to certain chemicals when her child is going through critical stages of development, brain development or gender differentiation, it's at those times when tiny amounts of these chemicals can lead to issues further down the line. We don't really understand much about this yet, but those of us who are steeped in this issue believe strongly in the precautionary principle, that we shouldn't need to wait until it's absolutely proven that these chemicals are dangerous. It should be up to the companies that make these chemicals to prove that they're safe, which is how other countries deal with this, but not how we deal with it in this country. And this is why I care so much. This is my little girl a couple months ago. So I'm thinking very carefully about what's in my body, because as a woman, I know that the persistent pollutants in my body will pass on to the next generation. So this all was sort of a lead-in to my husband and I starting our own organization in 2009 called 5 Gyres, to expand all this research on plastic in the Pacific to the other oceanic gyres, to the 4 other gyres. People kept asking us, well, okay, we understand that there's plastic in the Pacific Ocean, but what about the Southern Hemisphere? What's out there? So we cobbled together our wedding money and called this our honeymoon. This was our first expedition crossing the North Atlantic Ocean from St. Thomas in the Caribbean to Bermuda and on to the Azores off the coast of Portugal. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what that looks like. My first experience with a hurricane at sea. So you can see these were all of our data points, and you'll see a noticeable gap right here. We call that the hurricane gap. So we have more research to do in that ocean. This sample is from that expedition. The North Atlantic Gyre is also called the Sargasso Sea, and that's because of this plant here called sargassum. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Let's bring it in.
Lots of larval fish, sargassum, and little plastic particles. Look at that.
We're in the middle of the North Atlantic Gyre, also called the Sargasso Sea. It's called the Sargasso Sea because of sargassum. It's a kind of seaweed that filled our nets, but it's also full of small particles of plastic. What you got, Anna?
I see one.
It's a mouthpiece, I think, for a boxer. It's got some barnacles, some sargassum. This is 45 minutes of scooping through another windrow in the middle of the Sargasso Sea.
Yeah. Cool.
It's gonna pop out. So we just pulled out this plastic bucket, and we found a triggerfish inside that's so big that it looks like it can't get out.
I think his entire life is in this jar.
There we go. Oh my God.
Here's a triggerfish. Look at these teeth. Now look at this plastic bottle. And we find these all around the North Atlantic Gyre. Bits of plastics chewed on by marine life.
10 degrees to port, climb about 100 meters. Dun-dun-dun!
No, of course that is.
So we find tons of these kinds of bottles, and every time we find something like this with bites taken out of it, it was likely that this had, you might have noticed that some of those pieces of plastic were covered with barnacles, with encrusting organisms, sometimes with fish eggs. So it's not necessarily that animals are trying to eat the plastic. They might be trying to eat the fish eggs or the barnacles or the algae that's growing on this, and you can see perfect little bite marks. Those could be juvenile turtles, sharks, or triggerfish like you saw there. Then we had a pretty unbelievable opportunity to cross the Indian Ocean, and this was the one out of the 5 gyres that we weren't sure how we were going to get there. The boat that we partner with was nowhere near that part of the world, and it's really expensive to get it there. We got a call from some people in Amsterdam that were doing a round-the-world study, asking could they fly us out to Perth, Australia, would we bring our equipment on board and sail to Mauritius? And when we saw a picture of their boat, we said, all right. It was a pretty amazing boat. It was a pretty amazing experience. You could actually climb all the way out to the front of that boat and look for plastic and turtles and things leaping by. But again, as we got closer to the center of the Indian Ocean gyre, this is what our samples started looking like. Just sample after sample filled with marine life, Portuguese man-o-war and zooplankton and fish mixed in with this plastic. Some big items, like you see a cup, maybe a little Jell-O container, ice cream cup, but mostly fragmented plastic. Then was our toughest voyage, the South Atlantic. We actually did 3 passes through the center of that gyre, from Rio de Janeiro to Ascension Island and back, from Rio to Cape Town, South Africa, Namibia, back to Uruguay. One of the things we do on these expeditions is we always invite a different crew with us, from scientists to surfers to sailors. We've had artists, we've had musicians, filmmakers, journalists, even a bagpipe player from Scotland. That was kind of a mystery how he wound up there. We had really rough weather on this crossing, but we still had an amazing adventure, and I'm going to show you one more video, because maybe some of you one day will want to come sailing with us. I think your father was interested, and this gives you a real sense for what it's like to be at sea. This was a month long. The first 2 weeks were brutal, and then the rest of it was really nice. I'm lucky I don't get seasick, but our filmmaker was so sick he could barely drag himself out of bed with his camera. But it's not always like that. That was extreme.
That would definitely be.
This is not just another sailing voyage across an ocean. 13 people from different walks of life, with different expectations, all aboard a research vessel for 30 days, sailing to a place rarely observed by the human eye. We are heading into the unknown.
That's our captain.
Realistically, we'll have a look at it, but we're going to end up going southeast, further south of the course that we wanted to, because of the conditions. We've got this big high pressure. It's a lot further south than it ever normally would be, but that's where it is.
I've never been at sea for this long of a period.
I think I'm ready for living at sea.
We were heading that way east for about 3,300 miles.
We've got 28 days, 29 days to do that. We plan to be there early December. So we'll go straight through the middle of the South Atlantic gyre, looking at the plastics there in the ocean. We're going to get some fresh food and local produce, and we will get some fuel on board as well. Planning on spending just over 4 weeks at sea, transecting through the middle of the South Atlantic, through the gyre.
It's our goal on these expeditions to empower people with education and an authentic vantage from Gyre Central.
Now, no one's been out to this part of the world to investigate this particular problem of plastic marine pollution floating on the ocean surface. This is the first time.
There's an incredible amount of plastic out here, thousands of miles from land, which is actually polluting this beautiful wilderness.
Seeing that I mistake marine life for plastics made me realize how simple it must be for marine life to mistake plastics for food.
Pollutants and plastics may be bioaccumulating up the food chain. Well, the apex predator of that food chain is ultimately humans.
It's pretty sad to see how many small pieces of plastic are out in the ocean affecting not only marine life, but possibly humans as well.
And when you think about plastic everywhere, it's a pretty startling issue. It's a pretty difficult thing on the senses to get your head around.
This is the fourth of 5 large subtropical gyres in the world. And like the others, this one is full of marine plastic pollution.
And for me, it was always about looking forward, looking towards the next wind shift, the next weather system, competing against the other boats. But for the first time with this project, I've been forced to actually look down into the ocean and see what's there. And it's just been a revelation. It's just opened my eyes to the fact that there is a huge amount of plastic here in the ocean. We discovered that for the first time for me in the North Atlantic early this year, and now again here in the South Atlantic. Daily we're sailing past pieces of plastic, plastic water bottles, plastic film, plastic fishing line, plastic packaging, plastic crates, and photodegraded particulate pieces of plastic as well. So it's been a real eye-opener.
We've been trawling day and night every 60 miles across the South Atlantic Ocean, and every single sample has contained plastic pollution.
1, 2, 3.
We've been finding small, broken down pieces of plastic, like pieces of water bottles or toothbrushes, lighters. It's like a plastic confetti across the entire surface of the ocean.
When we use our nets to skim the surface, you get that little handful of confetti in every trawl. And it's really every trawl. We left Rio de Janeiro 2 weeks ago, began trawling within a couple hundred miles. First trawl, plastic. Next trawl, plastic. Every one. The trawls now easily have 5 times more plastic than the first ones. We're in the middle of the gyre, and we're finding exactly what we expected.
What we have seen amid the cresting waves is no figment of the imagination, no refraction of light on water. With eyes open to this reality, we are left to save our synthetic seas.
For life at sea. It's making me longing to be out there with my husband right now, but bigger things to do right now. So the last stop was the South Pacific. This was our crew. We had, have you guys ever seen Chico Bag? They're these little stuffed sack bags. So the founder of Chico Bag, that's him there, the plastic.
The one covered in the...
Yeah, he brought his bag monster outfit on board. He's a great guy, and he was in the process, well, he was being sued by the plastics industry when this expedition happened last spring. So this was a good chance for him to come out, and that's why we want people to come on board. We want people to come out, participate side by side with us in the research so that they'll go back home and be ambassadors. And we've had people from various parts of the world. This was 2 surfers, another scientist there. He's also a marine biology professor at SMC. She was a blogger from Argentina. There's the Scottish bagpipe player, filmmaker, musician. So diverse crew of people that will take this experience and then do something with it in their daily lives. And again, we saw the same thing in the South Pacific. What was really interesting about the South Pacific, and this is going to be our first published paper coming out pretty soon, is that we saw a really clear, dense patch. So if you look, these are all of our data points. The blue-green is less plastic, the red is the most dense, and you can see there was like a perfect bell curve as we got into the gyre and then out of the gyre. So it was very densely concentrated in the center of this accumulation zone. And that voyage was from Valdivia, Chile to Easter Island, where we landed. It was a really interesting place to land because of all the metaphors about collapse and the stories about Easter Island. Amazing place, and as you walk around the island, it's ringed with this plastic. To the left, you can see what a typical patch of rocky beach looks like. When you scrape the top layer of rocks off, to the right, that's what it looked like this ring of plastic scum around the entire island. So I think you get the point about the problem. I'll talk for a couple minutes about solutions, and then if you have any questions. So the solution is not recycling. And the solution is not landfills. Recycling is a great solution when it comes to things like glass and aluminum that can be fully and truly recycled in a closed loop, but that's not the case with plastic. There are very few plastic products that actually get taken from bottle to bottle. Some kinds of PET can be fully recycled, but most of it gets downcycled. Best scenario, worst case scenario, it winds up in our watersheds, it winds up in our environment, or incinerated. Or in an extremely inefficient use of resources, which is a landfill. And we have the largest landfill in the country right here, Puente Hills, not too far from here, right? And that's going to close down pretty soon. Anyone know when it's going to close down? I think in the next year or so, Puente Hills is going to close down. We're going to start trucking our garbage out to the desert.
No, we're going to start railroading it. We've already started building the railroad, and we've got our tipping fees that are increasing. Yeah. The railroad line going. It was scheduled to close
out to Inyo, I think, somewhere.
Farther out to the desert. So we're now paying more for fuel costs on the railroad to haul it out there. It was scheduled to close in March, but they extended it.
Yeah, so a landfill is not a good solution. Most of our plastic recycling in this country actually gets shipped overseas to China. And if you look at the bottom of a plastic product, and again, I'm preaching to the choir, so you guys probably know this, but if you look at the little chasing arrow symbol underneath a water bottle or any kind of plastic, that has no bearing at all on the recyclability. You see a little symbol that has the chasing arrows, and you would think that can be recycled, but that just tells you what kind of plastic it is, number 1 through number 7. So a much better solution you see right here on this table. Don't buy it if you know you can throw it away. If you have to buy it, look for it used. But try and look for things that can be fully recycled. Better yet is to just ditch plastic completely, ditch disposables completely, and move to things like reusable tiffins, reusable water bottles. I avoid straws completely. I heard that you guys are gonna go into bamboo straws, or we used to make them out of paper, which isn't as good as reusable, but it's still at least compostable, biodegradable.
Yeah, they used to be made out of paper.
Yeah, and there's still a company that we've been in touch with called Aardvark that does paper straws, but you can just ask for your drink with no straw. And I find it's a great conversation piece with the waiter or waitress. They might look at you kind of funny, and then you can tell them why. Innovation, we have a broken system that's cradle to grave. We can certainly do better.